Hey everybody, welcome back to Strange Stories with the Seeker and the Skeptic. I'm Jonathan. I am the Skeptic.
And I am Brittany. I am the seeker.
For this episode, we're going to be speaking with Erik Brown, my literal oldest friend. We've known each other since we were about 15, and we're in our early 40s now. So it's a long-lasting friendship for sure. I've always been curious, as I feel like when we were teenagers and hanging out and stuff, I was interested in this stuff, but based on the kind of dynamic I dealt with my family situation, I never knew who I could say what kind of stuff to. So I basically kept everything to myself. So I think that we kind of alluded to kind of stranger things to each other, but we never really got into it like in a a conversational way or anything. How how early for you did this kind of stuff, and by this kind I mean any kind of esoterica in general, become interesting or part of your life?
Hmm. I think it's funny you put it that way. Um, it from my experience, I think a lot of this really affects us more before we have a frame of reference for it. Like we begin noticing things more at kids at the child level that we can't explain, and then as we grow up, we forget the things we don't research. And you just see odd bits of phenomena that just don't make sense. But as I got older and had a better frame of reference for things, I mean, I certainly believe there's plenty out there that's unexplained. I certainly believe in ghosts, spirits, entities, things of that nature. I even believe in uh, extraterrestrial life. I mean, but there's plenty of directions that can go to. Um, it's again all a question of where you want to start. I would say for me, I started feeling energies at a young age and just got a very good ability to just tell if a place was creepy or not and could go off of vibes. But like, I never was able to do like, aura reading where people can see the colors of auras and things like that. I just could get a general vibrational.
Interesting. That's cool, man. So at what point did you decide you wanted to start going down like like your own maybe spiritual path, if that's even the right term for you? I'm not sure if it is or not.
Yeah, I'm spiritual. I'm pagan. I just don't have the same like pantheon structure most pagans or practicing Wiccans use. Um, I kind of have a unified pantheon. I spoke to you about that before, and it just works a little differently for me. My all my belief structure filters in through the moon as like the source of my divinity, the focus of it, and it still works on all other pagan frame of references. So I started learning, I would say about between 11 to 13. I was seeking out things that were outside of my family's religion, things of that nature, and just started looking outside the local box. I didn't really start getting a foundation for it until about the time we met, and I didn't really start getting into it heavy until I was in my late teens and 20s.
Gotcha. Was there any kind of like literature you came across that put you in a certain direction, or a certain person that kind of like helped you in that way, or was it just, you figured it out as you were able to based on did what you had?
Well, certain books helped me more at certain periods of the development than others did. I definitely begin with, like most people do, with Scott Cunningham, Raymond Buckland, and just start learning the basics. And then as I started getting better grasp of the entire idea of everything involved, I started leaning more into different authors. I would say all in all, it just depends on how you approach it, which author you would turn to first. Like most people, I started with the general ones.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by unified pantheon?
For me, I still I believe that we basically all worship the same deity. When you're first learning magic, you're like trying to pull out energy from different deities and sources. Like you might be calling on Artemis for something, you might be calling on Athena, or you might be calling on Hecate, trying to pull energy for a certain use. And for me, it's not like I have to pull it from all those different sources, because I see each one of those sources as a facet of the same thing. I
Okay.
also likewise believe that every different religion on earth also prays to the same deity, whatever you want to believe that is, and it's just a facet of that divinity. I think the gods are interpretations for each human or each subset of group of humans that believe in it, because that's what works for them. That's how their belief structure works. For me, my closest point to divinity is Luna, the moon. So that's where it all fills in for me. It's very similar to the one God theory that Christians use. It's just the opposite side of the coin, a different explanation of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I feel like I'm fall in line with that, like I connect with like angelic energy, but when people ask me like what does that actually mean, it's like, well, I feel like it's all coming from the same source. It's just a different frequency. And so it's showing up in different ways. And I feel like that's kind of what you're talking about as well.
Kind of. It's hard to explain with somebody that's not into the religion, or is just beginning the reading process, until they get a little further down the rabbit hole.
There's always a rabbit hole. So how does like what does that look like working with like Luna energy or lunar energy? What does that look like for your practice?
I mean, it's been so long for me, it doesn't look like anything particularly. It's now normal, it's way of life. Anytime I need to do something, it's just like I reach into that focus, and then from there it splits to the places it needs to go. So, like if I was trying to fuel a love spell or something, you light the pink candles, you say prayers to Aphrodite. Not in my case. I'm still making my prayer to the moon, and it just
Mm-hmm.
goes where it needs to go from there.
Mm-hmm. So
Uh,
you're just channeling the energy and kind of
yep.
using that in spell work. Okay.
Yeah. It just follows through on all points for me. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like I have to do anything separately. It also saves a bunch of time, to be frankly honest, too. Well, not when you have to alter the spells, but once
Right.
you
Well, you have mentioned that there have been some things that you have experienced. Could you give us an example of a story of something that has happened to you that most people probably would find to be unexplainable or strange?
a few small references, not really stories so much, but like locations, places I've been, things of that nature. We both grew up in Southport, or at least I did. You moved into the area, and there are a lot of places in Southport where if you're sensitive, you can certainly feel things. Um, Across from Southport, over the bay in Caswell Beach, you know of Fort Caswell, right?
I do.
And the Baptist Assembly bought it, and blah blah blah. They own it, and so on and so forth. Anyways, a lot of the buildings on Fort Caswell are still the historical buildings and have just been remodeled and reconverted for use. The building, however, that used to house the hospital is not what you would say a public space over there. And if you ever go into that building, you immediately, even just walking up the steps, you get an energy change and feeling like you definitely know bad things have happened here, even without knowing the building's purpose. And as you start going into the basement, that feeling gets completely worse. The more sensitive you are, the worse it is. You'll probably have like shivers the whole time you're there. You'll have unexplained sounds, ticks, and things that aren't in the other buildings or anything like that. um, I mean, just noises that might would have a common explanation, but have no reason for being there. Like, for example, there's no electricity going to the building or water, so why are you hearing things like hums, machinery, scrapes, stuff like that? I mean, little ones you could account to like wildlife, rats, mice, but like we're talking about things that sound like chairs being drug across the floor.
Gotcha. In a situation where you know you're the only person in the building, kind of deal. Yeah.
Or, yeah.
And that's been there for a long time, right? Like
Oh yeah.
definitely that was old when we were kids for sure.
Yeah, and the cement forts, you kind of get a little bit of that too. There are some houses in downtown Southport that have similar haunted vibes and things going on. There's a couple houses on the waterfront, especially the one that's got the Widow's Watch, that kind of has a deep haunted vibe. There's some places on Bald Head that have that deep haunted vibe too. I worked in a bed and breakfast on the marina for a while that was supposedly haunted, and it just I would say it's beyond supposedly. It definitely was haunted. It was just not like an active haunting. It was more older, so not as much activity, just more feelings and things, not like things that would make go bump in the night, just vibes mostly.
Mhm. So it's not like there's like a conscious energy. It's just more of like you can feel it. You can feel a different vibration,
Yeah,
I guess.
like a permeated feeling just throughout
Hmm.
the whole place. Absolutely. But yeah, not an active haunting, not things where it's movement or noises or anything. Um, most of my experience with that is quite limited because if I felt like something didn't feel right, I wouldn't be there.
Yeah. Time to
Yeah,
go.
yep. I mean, I hate to play the white people card, but I'm out. I'm out.
Yeah.
Ain't gonna do it.
Well, that is helpful that you're more sensitive to energy, because you can get yourself out of a situation before it becomes something.
Yeah, it's a very good skill to have, no matter what career you go into.
Hmm.
Oddities in the area. Area also has like biological oddities. Like, say for example, most people don't know it. This area is one of the few places you can find Venus flytraps, and then of course we have a nuclear facility, and it just makes things go crazy around here. Can't kill the bugs quite the same. Wildlife evolves slightly differently. I don't know. It's odd. We should be a sci-fi TV show by now.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely remember living less than a mile away from that plant when I was a teenager. I always felt kind of weird about it.
You lived closer than I did.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you could almost see it from there. That's not a little surprised that place doesn't glow in the dark by now.
For us. Let's see. A couple 10-15 miles up the road, there is a place outside of Leland, and it has been documented, and I have seen the phenomenon once. Been a few times, but I've only seen it the once. Is called the Mako Light. Have you ever heard of that?
I've
No.
heard of it, but I don't know the story.
Story diverges a handful of different ways, but it's supernatural, kind of like a ghost light. Follows the railroad tracks, and if you go certain times of the day, or excuse me, night, like you're likely to see it. Story goes that someone was somehow killed or decapitated in that area involving a train, and the person is like a conductor looking for his head.
Okay. Now that is interesting to me because I grew up in Lumberton, which is not terribly far from there. Um, and there, when I was a kid, like 7 or 8 years old, we were told a similar story. They said it was. I think it's 30 years ago, man. But I think we were told as little kids it was like the ghost of Blackbeard or something crazy in like 80s like that. But the same thing of the guy going back and forth on the train tracks hoping to find his head.
Yeah.
It's maybe a variation of that. So that's kind of interesting because it's not too far down the road, really.
Well, speaking of other weird things in the area where you were staying, all of Boiling Spring Lakes was an American Indian cemetery.
Gotcha. That's definitely totally interesting. That I always felt like Bowling Spring Lakes was a little bit of a stranger little town, regardless. Just the people there always kind of had a different vibe to me. You know,
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. I'll agree.
I can't help but assume that that has just intensified over the past couple of decades.
Lumberton area where you stayed also had a lot of Indian activity and a lot of supernatural activity as well.
That was a massively haunted place. Actually, after a few months ago, after we came to see you when you got married, we realized we were going to be driving very close to Lumberton, so we stopped in. And I remember being a kid thinking about how it felt like a weird place, and I always kind of in my head, I kind of brushed it off. I was like, well, that's just having a memory. You know, there was a lot of trauma in my early childhood. I just kind of felt like I was putting my own BS into the place basically because so many things happened. But we drove in and immediately like we felt it in our moods. The energy of the place was different. You know, it was a nice day. You know, it was a little overcast, but not really. It was sunny. It was, you know, summertime, and the sun was still shining, but it didn't seem as bright. And I wasn't going to say anything because I didn't want to sound weird. But then Brittany was like, "What is wrong with this place? Something is going on." And it's got this feeling about it. And we actually found my old neighborhood. We found my old house from when I was like 8 or 9. And walking through that neighborhood, you kind of feel like you're walking through and you're underwater. Like you know you're walking at normal speed, but you feel like you're going in slow motion almost. Something just seems different.
Definitely like a very dense vibration that did not feel great.
No, it makes you like kind of have to be more aware, almost hyper aware, just
Mhm.
feel safe, and that doesn't make you feel good because then you become anxious. So yeah, I feel you.
Yeah,
I feel that.
definitely an interesting place. And we started looking a little bit more into Lumberton, and they had a pretty significant like UFO event back in the 70s where like law enforcement saw it and there was like all kinds of reports and stuff like that. So
That's
something about
another
that
thing I
area.
guess I could say is more so through my teenage years, but not as much recently. I guess I just have a problem with not looking up as much as I used to. Um, I would often see like, you know, lights moving around in the sky in ways that we didn't have the technology for, and just wonder what the heck was going on. Never had like really a close encounter. It was always like a far away in the distance
Hmm.
type of thing. And who knows if that was our technology? I'm fearful, but I really don't think we had the technology for aircraft to move in that manner. Absolutely not.
Well, all the places that I lived in North Carolina growing up, we there were always aerial lights of some kind, phenomena, weird things, weird feelings. What's strange to me is, and I honestly kind of thought that I was incapable of really experiencing things anymore because being here in the mountains of Southwest Virginia, um, I haven't. It's been years since I really have had much in the way of any kind of experiences. There's been a couple one-offs here and there, and I've talked about it a couple of times throughout a couple episodes that are going to be coming out. But going back through Lumberton, I feel like it's not me. Maybe it's just where I live, just is not the hot spot that North Carolina tends to be. And I don't know if it's the fact that so much of North Carolina has a history of displaced Aboriginal cultures. Because the part of Virginia we live in Appalachia, there wasn't really much there. Like there was nobody there to oust, basically. Just the Scots Irish showed up, and it reminded them of Scotland, and they stayed. And so, like the hardship for this area is more coal mine based. So it's within the last 200 years. The hardship in the Carolinas started with the slave trade and got weirder. And so I can't help but wonder if there's some kind of energetic connection to the Carolinas and Georgia and places like that that you just don't see in certain other places. There's just been less, I don't know.
Well, no,
The,
you're absolutely correct. All the colonial states, for the most part, have more supernatural activity than most of the rest of them combined. I mean, I'm not saying like you can't have supernatural activity or hauntings across the country. You can, of course, but like it started on the East Coast and it is the thickest on the East Coast. That's where the people have been the longest, and that's where a lot of the most of the trauma and strife has
Hmm.
happened, especially
Yeah.
early on.
Yeah. I agree with that in terms of like the trauma, that leaves an imprint. However, I'm going to disagree with you, Jonathan. I do think it is you because every time he leaves this house and I'm here by myself, something happens. Like
That's true.
yesterday, the cupboards opened up by themselves yesterday after he left the house. The lights turn on and off when he's not here. So I do think you have something that blocks things, but that's just my
Well,
thought.
I don't mind blocking that. That's
Yeah,
okay with
me
me.
either.
Eric, what do you think about that kind of stuff, man? What's your take on that type of thing?
She needs to make nice with your house ghost.
I'm working on it. We're having conversations. Jonathan thinks it's the previous owner who may or may not have passed in this house. So it doesn't feel bad at all. It does not feel, it's just
Negative.
like it doesn't feel negative. It's just like they fuck with me when he's not around, So but yeah, gotta make nice.
I mean, think about it. If you don't pass on to the next plane or whatever, and you're here after you succumb, what are you going to do for fun?
Right. It's a good point.
Play with the tenant. Okay.
Yeah. Get somebody's attention. Yeah, absolutely.
Play with the sensitives. See if we can pick them out over the couch tonight.
Yeah, that's funny. How big of a role does like your spirituality play in your life?
Um, I would say it's pretty core to the person that I turned out to be in the end. In my day-to-day life, I'm not like a huge ritual person as
Hmm.
far as being pagan. I mean, I do perform rituals from time to time, but I'm very, how should I say, a lot of people are very planned out and methodical. I'm very spontaneous
Hmm.
with everything I do and observe.
Yeah.
It's not like I have a rhyme or a reason. Sometimes I'll remember to do something, and sometimes I'll have skipped that ritual for like 2, 3 years in a row.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like you kind of just go with the flow and whatever feels right or is needed in that moment, and go with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Your gifts change as you get older too. So like the things I could do when I was in my teens and my 20s is like hard to do now, and the things I was struggling to do then I have no problems doing now. So it just changes with time. You
Hmm.
gain new abilities, you lose some abilities.
Hmm. What are some of those abilities that you've either gained or lost?
Well, for example, I can still dabble with divination a little bit, but I don't have the efficiency or the efficacy that I had when I was younger. I had a clarity that I just don't have now when it comes to that type of thing. But now, like when it comes to manifesting or things of that nature, I have to be really careful because that can happen with just basic, simple witchcraft,
Hmm.
and that gets unfortunately easier as you get older. Be careful what you wish for.
Hmm.
So some people would call that prayer. So be careful who you talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our thoughts are powerful. You're communicating something out to the universe, so just a simple thought
Oh yeah, there are
is,
things listening,
yeah,
even your house ghost.
yeah, exactly.
Do you feel like those things have changed through like those like call them abilities, call them gifts, whatever you want to call them, have changed based on what you actually need in your life?
Mm, I guess to an extent, you're right. Cause like when I was younger, I was more focused on what's coming, and now I'm not. So it makes sense that that ability has lessened and isn't just standing to the front like it used to be. So yeah, I would say it's melded more towards what I need.
That's very interesting for sure. So I know that, and this is just, I don't know what extent of which, but I know that you've got a pretty fair amount of knowledge as tarot goes. And how long have you been involved with that?
Actually, tarot was kind of one of the beginning things I was taking a look into before I even started picking up the craft in any way, shape, or form. Um, it was kind of like the entry point to the esoteric when you're in this little washed up backwoods town. So of course it's going to be step one.
Mm-hmm.
So do like everybody does. You go out, you travel 30 plus miles to find your very first Rider Waite tarot deck, and you buy yourself the biggest book by whoever you think is the best at explaining it, and you just begin and you start to learn. You pick up the meaning of the cards as the people intend, but over time you eventually learn how to go quote unquote off book, and that's at the point when things get interesting, when you can put the book down and start to read the cards and they just come to you. You actually start getting deeper explanations, more clarity, more focused readings. It's just an interesting point, but it's just an explanation of a gift you may or may not have. And that was my touchstone into just anything weird, abnormal beyond the world of white picket fences. So that's a good place, I guess. Most people learn how to start and kind of get into astrology, then divination, and then from there it just opens the doors to a lot of other concepts and things people weren't thinking about before: spirituality, paganism, shamanism, all kinds of concepts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that is a good starting place for a lot of people. I know that's where I started. We were just talking about it the other day of I just remembered, I'm like, my grandma's the one who bought me my first tarot deck when I was 11, and she was not into any of this stuff. She's like a devout Catholic, it's just funny. Like that's where it all started, was with a tarot deck that was a Christmas present.
Yeah. Funnily enough, more often than not, most people's first deck is still to this day a Rider White deck. So
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. Mine was.
yeah. I think John asked me the other day, he was like, we got an Aleister Crowley deck and it's beautiful. And I was like, well, that's awesome. I'm glad you got it. I wouldn't use it though, but it's just great for aesthetic reasons.
What was your thought behind that? Like, why not use it?
Well, especially if you're new to it, it's
Mm-hmm.
not going to give you the same vibrations that you learned on to begin with, for one. So you might misinterpret a reading. Number two, it's not, again, it's kind of like saying number one again, it's not the same. It's different. You're going to see things that may not be, because you're not looking at the cards the same. I would say it's something that more experienced card readers should use, but I don't know. Use what feels right for you. You eventually get the feeling for it. I mean, Rider White's just kind of like training wheels, and you go from there.
Right. Yeah.
Fair enough. Do you have a specific one that you like feel is the best like for you specifically?
I've used primarily the Rider White deck most of my life. I also have a deck that is based on rose cards, but it's basically just the Rider White deck with rose embellishments all over it. So it's ultimately the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's just graphically slightly prettier, but that's makes me happy. I've used Egyptian Thoth decks. I've used other non-traditional variations of tarot decks, and I've even used playing cards. And I still keep coming back to Rider White if and when I want to do it. It's just I
Mm-hmm.
no longer really want to know the future. I don't think we deserve to.
Okay.
Say more about that.
I don't know. As I get older, the more and more I feel I don't deserve to know the future, nor does really anybody else. And we should make the best decisions we have based on on the knowledge we have in front of us. Knowing the future can harm somebody's development and evolution. So I've definitely shied away from that as I've gotten older.
Interesting. I mean, I always see tarot and oracle or any kind of divination as like it gives you the possibilities. And so like from there, I'm taking this information and not being like, oh my God, this is set in stone. This is what's going to happen, but more of how am I empowered to align with what I want to happen?
Well, now I guess I'm just so much smarter. I can already see all of those possibilities anyway, just from analyzing a situation. Whereas I just couldn't in a younger state put all of those concepts and ideas into that kind of a frame of reference. So it was great, I guess, back in the day. Um, but now today I can kind of look at a given situation and get a good feel for what should happen and what probably will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't feel the need to go look at the possibilities anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you're more of, I don't need the tools to tell me. I already have the intuitive knowing, and
Yeah,
to see it. Yeah, that's understandable.
it's definitely it's no longer a struggle for knowledge, a struggle for getting more knowledge. Now it's a struggle to sort the knowledge I have.
Mm-hmm.
But I forget things and remember things all the time that affects everything I think about. So what I change and think could differ day to day.
Absolutely. We are not the same people day to day.
Side note: kids, don't do drugs.
Yeah, with you on that one, buddy.
Do you remember? I don't know if you guys actually had a conversation about this, but about the cards that we had picked for Jonathan. I think it was last week sometime, and you wanted to talk to him about it. I want you to talk to him about it if you remember anything.
Well, we've already just given a Cliff's Note version of if you're talking about the Aleister Crowley cards. Yeah.
No, it was like the cards that we picked for him. It was like,
It was a quick reading, basically.
yeah.
The picture of
Oh, okay. I remember the reading a little better now. You had a lot of mostly good cards, but then in closer to the end of it, you also had the Tower.
Mhm.
And for me, the Tower always means obstacles, but like you had a lot of cups and you had a lot of coins in there, so you had some success and some good fortune in that reading. So it just depends on what you're trying to apply it to. But the Tower is generally obstacle, adversity in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's to me yeah, there's definitely always an obstacle with it, but it's like the dismantling of something so that you can rebuild. That's how I always read the Tower.
Yeah, it depends on what other cards are supporting it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Queen of Wands, okay.
I sent them the image, which we can also post the image when we post this as well.
Yeah.
All right. King of Swords looks like doing good after working on a problem. Cups, success. Pentacles, more success. Towers, obstacle. Something changing major. Just in a nutshell, I see success overall with whatever you're applying this read towards a question. But I do see some problems, and I see you facing adversity and coming out of it, at least in the beginning, anyways.
Gotcha. Interesting. So the question that was asked was just, should I write?
Should you write?
Which we didn't need cards for, but
Based on these cards, short answer, I'm going to say it's going to have a few frustrating moments, but the short answer is yes, you should write. And not just because it will be something that you would be good and successful at, but because it will also do things for you that no other activity will fulfill.
It's very interesting.
And that's about all I'm getting from that specific question.
Cool. Thanks. That's very, very interesting.
That's nutshelled. I'd have to pull out a book and do all kinds of crazies to give you a
Gotcha.
like. I'd have to pull out the book to give you the paid interpretation, John.
Like one of the big things for us overall is stories and have people telling their stories and how important story can be and is for people overall, but also like the fact that the tarot itself like is actually telling a story, like it's like a journey, and so I feel like those things can be. We both feel like those things can be tied together, and the history of the deck itself has always been super interesting to me. So we're looking into books and lectures and stuff that's based on that to get more information. It's kind of the direction we're going in on kind of a research project.
A lot of people know like there's these different symbols, but it's like, okay, well, where'd the symbol come from? And it, just like very, basic starting point where we're at right now. It's like, well, it's coming from a lot of different cultures and religions and time periods and stuff like that. So it's interesting to kind of trace it back. What other thoughts do you have, or stories, or anything you want to talk to us about?
Thoughts and stories. Well, let's, I guess, talk about supernatural. How about we talk about cryptids?
Okay, let's talk about them.
A lot of areas everywhere around the country has like their own cryptid, and North Carolina, the Western North Carolina, has got kind of some Bigfoot Yeti-ish type things going on. Here in the eastern side, though, we have some things that are unexplained that could be jaguars in the night screaming, but a lot of people say weird stuff, animals getting killed, things like that. Now, in our situation locally, that could be debunked a little bit with the fact that we had a very badly run zoo in the center of the county that a few animals escaped from. But it
Oh
goes
my.
Oh,
much
wow.
further than just the local area, though. I mean, it goes actually handfuls of counties out. Um, I can't think about anything specific, but I do like looking up cryptids. They're interesting. I've been looking recently at stories about Mothman and Jersey Devil. Something I've been reading up on a little more in the last year or two.
Mm-hmm.
What about you guys? Have you had any weird cryptic events or cryptid events?
I have not. I mean, other than like weird lights in the sky, seeing that a little bit. Um, I mean, Jonathan, we think he may have a screen memory.
Yeah, when I was 7, this is the first house I lived in Lumberton. The house is no longer there. And basically, there was a night where, my father, my parents only had one car. My father worked over like really late night shift managing a pizza delivery store, and he had the car because he was working, and my mom was going around the house um, very concerned something was wrong. Didn't really tell us why. We were little kids. I'm the oldest, and I was 7. I had 2 younger brothers at the time. Were I think 3 and 4, and when she looked around, she's like, "All right, get ready. We're leaving. We're going to go out of the house." And it was well after dark, and my dad had the car, so I was very curious as to where she thought we were going to go. And I was like, what's happening? She's like, just get ready and go. So we got on our, shoes and stuff and got as far as the front porch and looked into the yard, and suspended in the air, not flying. There was no flapping of wings. There was no sound. Just suspending in the air was the biggest owl you've ever seen, and bigger than that even. Like they don't make owls as big as this owl was. It's very light colored. It was looking right at us, there was no, again, no flapping of wings or anything. It just like was just like spread out, spread eagle. I hate puns, so no pun. But you know, but an owl. And there's times when I look back on that memory, and sometimes the eyes feel red to me, sometimes the eyes feel green to me. Like, and I think one of the reasons why I remember this is because I've told this memory to people in my family or other people multiple times, so it keeps the memory alive. But I blinked, and we were back in the living room, and we are all sitting on the couch in our living room, and my mom was there, and then I was on the couch, and then Rick, my middle brother, was there, and then Ed, my youngest brother, was there. So we kind of in order of age. And my mom looked at the clock in the living room and said, "Where did that hour go?" And I'm 7, so I don't have an answer for that. So I don't know. That was very strange, but almost as strange as all of that happening was the fact that my mom, and it seems kind of weird to harp on this, but my mom hated that couch. She could not stand it. She would never have deliberately sat on it to save her own life. She could not stand it. And the fact that I looked around and she was sitting there, to me, is more disturbing than the missing time, the owl that couldn't have been there, the defying of physics of not flapping, any of that. And I've never forgotten that. And there's times throughout my life that I've asked my mom about that, and she's remembered that and said, "Man, I wonder what that was. I wonder why that happened." And there's times when she's looked at me and been like, "John, I don't remember that at all. I don't know what you're talking about," and doesn't remember me asking her about it in previous years. It's just as if it had not happened, and if me asking about it had not happened. And that's one of the earlier memories I have of something strange happening. And it's there's a couple other things that have happened dealing with owls that don't make a whole lot of sense. And when I was a teenager, reading like Communion and reading John Keel's Mothman Prophecies, the idea of screen memories are through those books, and I couldn't have helped but wonder, did something else happen, and that's what my brain put there, and I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, if the memory was too terrible and your brain just auto washed it, so you remember something completely differently. That does happen to people, but so do supernatural events, so it could go either way.
But sometimes those screen memories are theoretically, sometimes screen memories are to cover up a weirder supernatural event. There's a book called The Messengers by a guy named Mike Clellan, came out a couple years ago, who has spent his entire life having visitations, most of which turn out to be screen memories where what he remembers is an owl, but it's not really owls, it's other things. And he's done basically a lifetime of research on this. And a lot of the stuff he's talking about matches experiences that I've had.
Hmm. Interesting. I'll have to say I haven't read that book.
I definitely recommend to anyone who's interested in strange things, especially anything quote UFO related.
I was gonna say it's interesting too, like the two events that we've been to recently. So we went to like the Flatwoods Monster Convention in September, and then this past weekend we were at a night of paranormal podcast like event where just different paranormal podcasts were talking. And each of those events, speakers talked about screen memories being either an owl or giant birds. And so it's like that's interesting that just keeps coming up.
I wonder if there's like let's see, like how dreams, different images in your dreams have certain meanings. I wonder if that also has a layer of interpretation to it. What you're seeing in the place of that memory has a certain connotation towards what it's hiding.
Yeah.
Well, if you look into mythology with owls specifically, and one thing that Clellan talks about in that Messengers book that I don't think I would have thought of, is and he was told this by a Native American friend of his who is a shaman in southwestern United States, is that you shouldn't just look at the potential symbolism of what certain cultures think of for something like, for example, an owl. But if you have an idea of what your like hereditary background is, what do those cultures think of something like, for example, an owl? Like, and his example is the same as mine. I did ancestry.com a couple of years ago and found out that the majority of my DNA is either Sweden and Denmark, and also Scotland. Surprise, surprise. I might. Um, so that's where most of my genetics come from. And if you look in the both of those cultures, an owl mostly is a bringer of wisdom, mostly from to and from the underworld, but from other places as well. But mostly is a bringer of heavy wisdoms, like heavy truths. It's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's both and neither, but it's something that is a messenger. Really, that's why I think that's why I call this book "The Messengers." It's something that brings you truth and wisdom from somewhere else.
I could see that. There's always been a certain mystical connotation with owls from other references. They fly forward in a lot of different mythologies and cultures. So, like, I mean, they're represented in Egyptian mythology, they're represented in cultures across the world. I mean, they're common across the world, but they mean slightly different things in each place. But they always have like this kind of hidden knowledge component that's
Mm-hmm.
common amongst all of the cultural references.
Yep.
It's super interesting to me, for sure. That and owl imagery tends to keep seems to keep following me everywhere.
Well, there are certain things that follow people. Um, like for example, people will just notice numbers, certain numbers surround them more, certain imagery surrounds them more than other people. For me, I see threes and fives a lot.
Mm.
I mean, I know they don't pop up any more than any other common numbers. I'm just noticing them more.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, we definitely see repeating numbers too a lot. 1111 a lot. Like one of us will see it at least once throughout the day.
Yep, that's pretty common too. I've had
Mm-hmm.
conversations with people about that one.
This has been very enjoyable, man, for sure. Um, I think that probably in the near future, I'm gonna, if it's okay, pick your brain a little bit more about tarot stuff as I have more questions, if you're cool with that.
Not a problem. I
Yeah.
mean, it's one of those things where those who can't teach, so I might as well.
Well, the knowledge is still there, whether the channel is open or if you want
Well,
it to be open. Yeah.
the channel's not on that one's not really as open as it used to be. I can it's like the difference between being stuck on your local news channel and watching CNN.
Mm-hmm.
So
Do you well, I mean, it sounds like you're like, I'm not really looking into the future. So it's not like you're like seeking guidance like from the moon or anything either. You're just kind of like,
now I will use the cards occasionally when I'm like asking for advice. That's about the only time I really use the cards
mm-hmm,
anymore. I'm not like really looking for the future. I'm just kind of trying to get a feeling. And
mm-hmm,
I'm not usually in the type of situations where I need to have that feeling anymore. Now I kind of always have that feeling.
mm-hmm,
So when I get confused or clueless, then I just need to sit down, put my cards out, and that kind of puts me in the right frame of reference to be able to digest something that I can't normally.
mm-hmm.
But
Yep.
yeah, usually just looking for advice now, not trying to chart how something's going to happen anymore.
Yeah.
But
I feel
even
like
then,
that's hard to do.
well, it's also so hard because like I don't know, It's falls under the situation where it's always easier to see somebody else's problem, solution, and answer. But when you start looking into the realm of your own affairs, it just gets completely messy.
Mm.
Much harder to understand. I don't know why that is, but it seems to be the case for most people too. So,
Well, it's harder to be objective with our own stuff. It's like we have our own, ego that gets involved, that can kind of block the actual answers from coming through.
that's true as well.
Well, okay. I do have a question for you. Just because I'm curious about where people where they land on things. So like you're interested in cryptids, you're looking more into this. Where do you think they're coming from? What are your theories?
I think they're honestly coming from here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are things that we'll always never have fully discovered. I mean, we are masters of land, but not all of land. There's pockets of earth we still have yet not gotten a complete map of. Who knows what's there? I mean, it's kind of like back in when we were still charting the planet in the middle of Africa. There be dragons there. I mean, yeah, there's a lot less that's unknown, but there's still places we don't know anything, and we're still finding new species of things every day. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, who's to say we won't actually find the mother chupacabra or so on and so forth,
Mm-hmm.
just through biological discovery. There are the one thing I think that is interesting in almost every single case of cryptids is they're always elusive. So the biggest part is paying attention. I myself haven't seen a Bigfoot, but I want to believe they're out there. I haven't seen a chupacabra, but I want to believe they're out there, and
Mm-hmm.
so on and so forth for a lot of the rest of them. It's interesting because these are just, in a lot of cases, can be folklore things, but in some cases, they can manifest in different ways other than stories. Like you can actually have people that have sightings, encounters, and all kinds of strange events and things that happen. And usually, most of them are unique.
Mm-hmm.
Although sometimes people, if they even had a strange encounter, wouldn't even know what they're looking at. And I guess that goes back to the screen memories.
Right. Yeah. That's definitely a possibility. Do you think the same? Because I feel like there's a little bit of a difference between cryptids and aliens, I think. But do you think the same for aliens that they are from here, or do you feel like they're coming from elsewhere?
I don't know. I think I don't know enough to make an educated decision
Mm-hmm.
about like there's a part of me who wants to believe that aliens are just time travelers and are kind of like
Mm-hmm.
maybe us but super evolved way down the road in the future. Or then there
Mm-hmm.
are days where I sit there and think that the whole principle of wasted space in the universe, there's somewhere out there has to be intelligent life that can also travel amongst the stars and whatnot. So I don't know. That also brings us back to the theory of why haven't we had extraterrestrial communication yet? Or have we, and it just been covered up?
Right.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
All those things are very interesting questions, though.
Well,
They
definitely
sure
are
are.
a bunch of different ways you can look at that. Charles Fort, who was a guy at the turn of the last century, who collected weird stories. At some point, he got to the belief somehow that we, as Earth, are some other species' property, and that's why we don't see direct contact from lots of different species. Is that whoever our planet is owned by extraterrestrially, um, people are afraid of, and so they don't come near us. Like we're owned in that way, which I don't think I've ever heard anyone else put it that way before.
I haven't yet, and that's actually an interesting explanation.
Mm-hmm.
I just got finished yesterday reading a book called The Crypto Terrestrials by a guy named Mac Tonys. He actually passed away about 10 years ago, just before it was published for the first time. But you can get it on Amazon now. It's currently being distributed, and it's a little bit of a thought experiment. But the premise is, what if they do exist? They are physical. They are real, but they are a concurrently evolved race of beings that are from here. So we are sharing a planet with them, and they just don't have the genetic proliferation that we have. And so the things that they do are done in a way of trying to exist at the same time as us, without us really knowing that they're there. And it's a super interesting concept.
Yeah, there's some sci-fi TV shows that are exploring the same concepts right now.
Fair enough.
Believe it.
But that's a whole different conversation for a whole different.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, though. There's a lot of theories, a lot of questions to ask, but it's fun to play around with. Sometimes it freaks me out.
No, this has been great, man. Thanks for
Yeah.
talking with us. Hopefully we get to do it again sometime soon.
Absolutely.
All right. You
All
take
right.
care, okay?
See you, buddy.
Have a great night.
Bye.
Thank you so much for being here. If you have a strange story you want to share with us, email us at seekerandskeptic@gmail.com. We look forward to talking to you soon.